So in the spirit of Ellen DeGeneres, my point is, and I do have one, but it's going to take me a minute to get there. I'd like to begin by talking about dreams. Not dreams in the sense of, can everybody hear me okay? Not dreams in the sense of aspirations, but dreams in the sense of what happens in the middle of the night. And I realized some time ago that many of my dreams, and this won't shock anybody, I don't think, many of my dreams are about my fears and the things I have difficulty with, the things that agitate me. And so I might have a dream, say, for example, just to be theoretical, that I'm scheduled to give a Dharma talk at a day of mindfulness with my Dharma friends. And I don't know what to say. But that doesn't stop me, of course, from talking. And I say some really stupid things, and my friends realize how stupid I really am, and they stop being my friends, and it's horrible, just horrible. Now, I don't want to talk about the content of dreams, because dreams are many things, including being a safety valve for those kind of fears and agitations. But what I do want to talk about, and which will lead me, I hope, to the topic for the day, is what we do with the dreams. I noticed I was waking up, this is some while ago, I noticed I was waking up agitated. And I wouldn't usually remember my dreams, but I came to realize after I did remember a few dreams and realized they were agitating dreams, that even if I didn't remember them, they were still agitating me, and I'd wake up agitated. And in the absence of mindfulness, that's how I would begin my day. And again, in the absence of mindfulness, that's how my day would proceed. So a while back, I started the habit, and I remember to do this most mornings, that I'll sit on the side of my bed as I'm getting out and about to begin my day and breathe, come back to my body, come back to the present moment. And as often as not, I'll feel joy as I engage myself in that way. I'll feel joy, if for no other reason than really understanding, oh, geez, that really didn't happen. And so to put it a little bit more different, a little differently, first I engage myself and come into the present moment and breathe, experience my body in this moment. Because in this moment, all those fears, all those agitations aren't happening. And I can realize that they're just stuff I made up, just stuff that responds to who I am, how I grew up, all the conditioning that we have. And that's what our practice really is. It's shining the light of awareness on what is really going on within us, so that we don't bring our agitation, our angers, our fears, and most important, our habitual ways of reacting automatically to all of those things. And this is why Thai teaches us that before we engage others, before we engage the world, we first have to engage ourselves. To train ourselves through our mindfulness practice to turn toward what is really happening within us first, so that we don't carry that out and out of our habit energy, act out of that place as we move through our days. And this is important not just for, in this case, in this example, my well-being. I don't know about you, but when I'm agitated and not mindful, I can be not so pleasant to be with. So it's not just for me that I engage myself. It's first and foremost for Mary, who's usually the next person I see and who sees me in the day. And then everybody else I encounter through the day. And what this practice of ours does is that it creates the causes and conditions both for skillful, wise engagement. Skillful because we're not being controlled by our habits of mind, by our habit energy, and by all the things that are agitations and fears and concerns, which we all have. We're all human beings. Without being guided unmindfully by all the behaviors, the habitual behaviors that are triggered by our fears, our concerns. And it's even more than that. I don't mean to be like a Popeil commercial here, but there's more. It also creates the causes and conditions for joy to arise. Because when we're lost in our habitual thought patterns, our habits of mind, our habit energy, those are all three names for all the same thing, joy cannot possibly arise because we're lost in the past or the future or in our fears and our concerns. So we're creating the causes and conditions, not just for skillful engagement, but for joy. And the joy of engaging our practice is what our day is about today. In the example I just realized of having this horrible dream of coming up here, it's really a variation of the dream of, all of a sudden I don't have any clothes on, right? All of a sudden I'm talking to all of you and I don't know what to say, which, as I mentioned, has never stopped me from saying things. And that comes from my conditioning, who I am personally and who we all are as human beings. And the other thing about creating the causes and conditions for mindful engagement, mindful action, and joy is that it's also creating the causes and conditions for our very own liberation. Because liberation is simply being free of all that conditioned agitation, free of all the habits of our mind. Oh, I'm not good enough. I'll never be good enough. What if I make a fool of myself? And when we stop and do something as simple as breathing, we are setting the stage for our own liberation, if only for a moment. If only for a moment. Now, I don't mean for this to be a should. It's not do as I say and you will feel joy. We all have to find our own way through this. And sometimes we live under the full weight of life's often difficult challenges of old age, of sickness, of death, of loss, not to mention all the things that the Buddha told us would cause our suffering. Delusion, greed, aversion, turning away from life as opposed to turning toward it. And sometimes life isn't joyful. So we're not trying to force joy. Our practice is about increasing awareness. Awareness, for example, that, when I think about making a fool of myself, I'm aware that in my body I feel very, very sad or angry or fearful. And it's that awareness that liberates us. We're not trying to get rid of what we're aware of. We're just trying to be aware of it. And I'm sure you've all experienced letting go of all these things we think about all the time out of our habitual patterns of mind. I'm sure we've all experienced this, at least if you've been practicing for a little while, and saying, that fear that I have didn't really happen, is not happening, will not happen in this moment. And in that moment of letting go of all the fears, we can feel joy. Oh, this is great. I'm not sitting in front of all of you naked. I'm really not, I'm pretty sure. I see people in my own personal experience practicing in this way in a couple of different areas in my life. And this first one, I do not mean this to be prescriptive, but we all of us who have been given the opportunity to live with cancer in this lifetime have to find our way through it as best we can. And this practice helps so much. And I've talked with many people, since I've had this, we call them half pose sometimes, another practice opportunity. You know, this isn't anything you'd ever wish, but it's what happens in life. And I've talked to many other folks living with cancer, not everyone, who eventually come to a place of realizing the heightened awareness of the preciousness of life. And it's not like, oh, good, cancer, I'm happy to be alive. There's a long trail that leads to that. But once you get there under the pressure of having this thing happen to you in life, and you really understand just how precious it is, you have this awareness, and such joy can also emerge, not replacing the difficulties and the challenges, and the pains, and the extreme fatigue, and all of that stuff, all of the stuff that we live with. But in addition to, wow, this is special. And like I said, we all get there in our own way and in our own time. I don't mean this to be prescriptive. And I also see this awareness at work in many of the fellows in the prison sanghas that a number of us in here are privileged to visit. Prison can be a very, very hard place to be. It not can be, that there's a real realization of that potential in prison. It is a hard place to be. But some of the guys, the more they practice, start to understand that they have a choice, not unlike the choice I was talking about with cancer, is that you can get lost in your habitual states of mind, of anger, of even rage, of self-pity, whatever you got, you know, what do you got? And just be lost there. And ironically, behind some of these states of mind are the very causes and conditions that got them into prison in the first place. Or you can say, oh, I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling angry at the injustice of the world that contributed to my being here. And I'm just going to live in the present moment. And when we see prisoners, especially, you know, folks who've been in prison for a long time and who either aren't going to get out in their lifetimes or have a long way to go before they get out. When we see prisoners living with an incredible integrity, an incredible fidelity to their practice, it inspires those of us with more privilege to practice diligently too. So, but we don't need to be in these dramatic circumstances to feel this awareness, this kind of awareness that opens the door to joy and to skillful, wise engagement in the world. Our practice isn't about getting ourselves ready for having cancer or being with people with cancer or going into prison and being with people in prison. Our practice is about us coming to these realizations as we wake up in the morning after having a night full of dreams. It's about us having these realizations as we prepare breakfast or take our shower or go to work if you're still working or being with your family. That's really what our practice is about. The examples I cited before just exaggerate, put under a microscope these things. So I'd like to talk quickly about a couple of elements of our practice that contribute to feeling joy and lead us to be engaged. And the first is presence, which, as the word implies, is being fully present to life as it is, whether it's fun or not fun, happy or full of grief or full of whatever you got, without the automatic arising and embracing and clinging to the stories we tell ourselves. Why me? Oh, this sucks. I can't stand this. And without automatically clinging to our preferences. We all have preferences. Those aren't the problem. Clinging to them is the problem. Clinging to the idea that, oh, I have this, and I want to get rid of it. I won't be happy till I get rid of whatever this is. Or if I only had that, I'd be happy. Without clinging to judgments about ourselves and others. And without, and instead we're just here, without all that mind activity, without the corrosive judgment. Thay often says that presence, our presence, is the greatest gift we can give ourselves and others. And it's so hard because we're so conditioned to turn away from what's real in life, especially when what's real in life is unpleasant. And presence grows out of connectedness, out of what Thay calls interbeing. This radical interconnectedness of all things that Thay talks about, that the Buddha taught, is the opposite of separateness. The me that we kind of habitually engage in, even when we're not aware of it. I mean, think about your meditation. Is there an implied my breath when you are aware of breathing in? Or is it just the breath, which is going to happen whether it's yours or not until it stops? It's about dropping all of that and replacing it with a non-judgmental, lovingly clear view of the world as it is, with all of its beautiful interbeing. And the second element I'd like to talk about is being very directly tied to skillful, loving, compassionate engagement is, in fact, compassion. The Dalai Lama once famously said, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. Now, there's a little bit of confusion sometimes about what compassion is, because it's confused sometimes with empathy. Empathy is a good thing, for sure, but it's, I see your suffering, I'm so sorry. Again, a good thing, but there's still this duality. I see your suffering. I see you are suffering. There's still I and you, whereas compassion grows out of this embodied sense of interconnectedness, out of interbeing. Compassion is also willingly turning towards suffering when it's present in ourselves and in others. And after turning toward the suffering, having the honest, deep, wholesome desire to alleviate suffering to the extent we can. And compassion applies equally to ourselves and to those we're with. And the more we practice compassion, the more we realize that suffering is suffering. My suffering is no different than your suffering, other than the details. And we get so lost in the details. But the suffering we're talking about here is deeper than the details. It's the loss of awareness. That's essentially, in simple terms, what the Buddha was talking about when he used the word dukkha, or suffering. And presence is a precursor for compassion. We can't be compassionate unless we're present, unless we're turning toward. And it doesn't necessarily mean solving the problems of the world. But when we're clearly present, when we have that clear view I was talking about, we can think of solutions more easily, can't we, without that overlay of our habits of mind. And we can also solve problems without invoking the very problems that caused the problems. So for example, when we look at racial injustice, this is caused by kind of a tribalism, by a selfishness and a greed, but as we're learning more and more, it's also caused by fear and anger. So as we try to engage the world, if we try to engage the world, to help solve or minimize the problem of racial injustice, if we approach it with fear and anger, we're only pouring more gasoline on the fire of fear and anger that caused the problem to begin with. And that's not compassionate, that's just letting our own thing out into the world. That's why Ty always said, let's not go to peace rallies if we're not feeling peaceful. We want to create peace. My point is, finally I'm getting to it, once we're in a state of engaged compassion, the door is open to joy. Joy was so important to the Buddha that he included it as one of the 7 factors of awakening, which he included in 2 of his seminal sutras, teachings, Anapanasati, awareness, full awareness of the breath, and Satipatthana, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which are at the very core of how Thai teaches us not just Buddhism, but mindfulness. And they're at the very core, joy is at the very core of those teachings, both as the fruit of our practice and the practice itself. Because if you're not feeling joy, then it's time to look at your practice and say, oh, this is getting in the way, these habits of mind. Joyful engagement. Another quick word about compassion. It is not unboundaried. It is not unboundaried. Pema Chodron talks about needing equanimity, or just that hardcore acceptance of what is. Otherwise, we will suffer from compassion burnout. Nor is it what Pema Chodron calls idiot compassion, which is also a form of compassion, but with boundaries. If somebody is an alcoholic and they say, I really, really need a drink, it's not compassionate to give it to them. I know this. This is one thing I know. And sometimes compassion has to be fierce, loving, present, but compassionate. Joyful engagement takes courage. It takes courage to turn toward our own suffering and the suffering of others, because, as I mentioned, we are so conditioned to turn away from suffering. It's like, ew. You know, we all become teenage girls when we see suffering. Ew. We don't want anything to do with it. And we've all devised strategies to avoid being with suffering. But all the wonderfully brave folks I've met with cancer, all the wonderfully brave folks I've met in prison, because of the extremity of their situation, learn that there is no option. If we're going to engage the world with joy, there is no option but to train ourselves to turn toward suffering. And that's really what we're training ourselves to do every time we sit, to understand all the factors in our mind that take us away from the present moment, especially when the present moment is difficult and challenging. And to just note, shine the light of awareness on that and say, oh, look at that. I'm taking a drink, or I'm getting busy, or I have to go to work for the next 3 days without sleeping, or whatever it is that we each do to avoid suffering. And every time we take a breath in awareness, we're also taking a breath and training ourselves to turn toward whatever is in front of us. And when we do that, guess what else is there? Wise engagement and joy. So there's no wise engagement without turning toward life as it is, and there's no joy without turning toward life as it is. It doesn't mean all the hard things go away. They don't. It doesn't even mean they're diminished. They're not. But how we relate to the hard things in life does change. The causes and conditions that can lead to joy and engaging wisely with ourselves and with others and with the many, many injustices of the world. When we turn towards suffering, that's the gift we get. And joy can arise, and wise engagement can arise. And I think all of us aspire to engage the world mindfully and peacefully and joyfully. Mindful engagement is just another word for liberation, and it's another word for peace. And it's easy, even those of us who've been about this for a long time, to say, oh God, oh okay, I don't know if I'll ever get there. I don't know if I'll ever get there. So I'd like to end with a quote from Thai that really, to my mind and in my heart, sums up what we're about. And he's using the word peace, but it's also joy, mindful joy and mindful engagement. Thai says, peace is all around us, in the world and in nature. And is within us, in our bodies and our spirits. Once we learn to touch this peace, we will be healed and transformed. Now here's the key part. It is not a matter of faith. It is a matter of practice. It is not a matter of faith. It is a matter of practice. And our efforts to engage the world wisely, with compassion, with equanimity, and with joy, those efforts begin with your very